Understanding the timeline here is crucial. We've been married for 3 years now, but before that, we were a couple for 2 years, making it about 5 years we've been together in total. 2 weekends ago, her sister got married, and, naturally, my wife was part of the wedding party. As expected, she spent the 2 weeks leading up to the wedding helping her sister with all the preparations. It wasn't a big deal, she kept me updated, and I knew this was coming. She took time off work from Wednesday to Friday to assist her sister and ended up staying there for the entire 3 days. While I know her sister fairly well, I barely know the guy who's now my brother-in-law. I've met him a few times, and he seems all right, but that's about it. On Saturday morning, I arrived a few hours before the ceremony, hoping to catch a brief moment with her. I didn't want to intrude on her busy day, but I hadn't seen her since Tuesday. When she spotted me outside her parents' house, she had her brother come out to tell me she would meet me at the car. I thought it was a bit strange, but I didn't think much of it. When she finally came out, she sat next to me and gave me a kiss. Instead of showing joy at seeing me, she told me she needed to talk and didn't want it to overshadow her sister's big day. She warned me that I might hear some things about the best man and her during the reception and didn't want it to be uncomfortable for me. I was taken aback and sat there, stunned. She revealed that about 4 years ago, she had a fling with the best man. It meant nothing to her, but knowing I tend to get jealous, she wanted to give me a heads up so I wouldn't be caught off guard if I heard anything. I sat there, processing this. This wasn't how I had expected my morning to unfold. I told her I appreciated her honesty and that it wasn't a big deal now. She went back inside, and I decided to grab some lunch before heading to the church. While eating and scrolling through my phone, it hit me. She said the fling was 4 years ago, but we've been together for 5. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she just got the timeline mixed up. But then I recalled a period about 1.5 years into our relationship when her behavior was odd. She was unusually unavailable and took 2 weekend trips with work friends. Naturally, this left me feeling uneasy, but I knew I had a long day ahead. At the wedding, I watched everything unfold. During the reception, there was a line to congratulate the newlyweds, and the wedding party stood there as well. My wife was with some guy I didn't know, though the best man was there too. I tried to act nonchalant about it. When the reception finally started, it took ages for them to arrive due to photos. Once she was there and sat with me, I decided not to bring up the earlier conversation. I didn't want to ruin the day. But she then informed me that all the groomsmen and bridesmaids would be dancing, and she would be dancing with the best man. I asked why, given that she wasn't his partner for the event. She explained that the maid of honor and her partner were married and wanted to dance with each other. By this point, I was more than a little upset, though I tried to hide it. Thankfully, I had the foresight not to drink, as I know I get angry when I'm drunk and wanted to avoid any additional trouble. She chatted with everyone around her, and when it was time for the dance, the best man came over, extending his arm to her with a confident smile. She stood up to join him, and I made a point of not watching them. I tried to focus on other things, but when she returned with him, they were laughing and joking like they'd known each other forever. It felt like they were old friends reconnecting. She thought it would be a good idea to introduce us, and even though I wanted to tell him to take a hike, I managed to keep my greeting somewhat civil. Despite my strained politeness, he didn't take the hint and stayed to chat with her for a few more minutes. Watching them reminisce and laugh about their shared past only fueled my frustration. The more they joked and shared memories, the angrier I became. Eventually, I excused myself to go to the bathroom, hoping a break might cool me down. When I returned, he was gone. It was a small relief, but the damage was already done. When she came back, she told me she thought I was being rude. That wasn't exactly what I needed to hear at that moment. I told her that this wasn't the right time or place for such a discussion, but assured her we'd talk about it later. She then announced she was going to change clothes. Once she returned, she planned to inform her sister that we were leaving because I had spoiled her day. However, she wanted to avoid causing any disruption to her sister's celebration. I assured her I could handle myself and wouldn't be a bother for the rest of the day. I preferred to stay out of the drama and avoid making a scene. She went off to change and returned with an unmistakable huff. Understand, I hadn't uttered a word to her about any of this or even to the best man. I had even shaken his hand. It must have been my visible discomfort that triggered her reaction. She was adamant that we leave immediately. I told her if she truly wanted to go, we could. Alternatively, since I had come in my own car, I could leave so she could stay if she preferred. At first, she said we should stay, but then she shifted and said if I couldn't improve my attitude, should just leave. I asked her how exactly I was behaving, and she claimed it was clear I was acting like a silverback gorilla, ready to pick a fight. I was torn between laughing at her dramatic comparison or feeling deeply insulted. I went back inside, sat down, and watched her mingle with other guests. I struck up a conversation with her brother for a while, and later, I ended up at our table talking with her grandma. It was a small comfort to engage in less charged conversations, but the tension still lingered. When we left, I got home just before she did. I was waiting in the living room, mentally preparing for the conversation ahead. As soon as she walked in, I didn't waste any time. I straightforwardly asked her to recount the story about the best man again, and she repeated it verbatim, just as she had before. After a long, uncomfortable silence, I asked if she was absolutely certain about the timeline. She affirmed that she was. I reminded her that we had been together for 5 years, meaning this fling occurred well into our relationship. Her response was chilling. Instead of appearing flustered or defensive, she simply said, "I know." I pressed her for more details. She explained that they had worked together, that it was purely a physical relationship, and that she felt our relationship wasn't great at the time. She insisted she had no feelings for him and never intended to leave me. It was just a bit of fun over a few weekends. She admitted it might have been a mistake to bring this up now, but didn't want me to be blindsided. I didn't react the way she had anticipated. Instead, we had a huge argument, which ended with her accusing me of being childish. She insisted that since this affair happened before our marriage, it had no bearing on our life together now. Two things struck me. First, I strongly disagree that this has no impact on our relationship. She cheated on me, and it's infuriating that she doesn't seem to feel any remorse. Second, being labeled as childish when I'm upset really irritates me. It feels like she's trying to assert some kind of superiority over me, which only makes me more frustrated. I told her I needed time to think things through. She dismissed it, saying there was nothing to consider. We loved each other, and this didn't change anything. That was 2 weeks ago, and I'm still struggling with it. She's been trying to get me to talk over the past few days, but I find it hard to see her the same way as before. Part of me wonders if I'm overreacting. After all, it happened years ago, we're married now, and there haven't been any issues since. But another part of me is reeling from the betrayal, and it stings deeply. What makes it worse is that instead of trying to understand my pain, she's attempting to guilt me into forgetting about it and moving on. To be blunt, I'm caught in a state of limbo. Recent developments haven't made things any clearer. In fact, they've only complicated my decision-making process. Last week, my feelings were dominated by anger, but as the weekend dragged on, sadness took over. I desperately want to switch off the part of me that still loves her and move straight to anger, to flip the switch that tells me I'm not a fool for being mistreated. But the truth is, it's incredibly challenging to do that because I still have strong feelings for her, and this situation is tearing me apart emotionally. Here's what's happened that has any real significance. She eventually came to the harsh realization that I wasn't going to just get over what happened. This realization led her to face the uncomfortable possibility that I might want out of our marriage. It was a crushing blow for her and led to what seemed like a full-blown nervous breakdown. I had been warned by many from my initial post that she might try to manipulate me, and I braced myself for what I expected to be insincere displays of emotion. I was ready for her to use crocodile tears to get me to back down. But it soon became glaringly clear that she wasn't just putting on an act or faking it. She was genuinely experiencing a severe panic attack. This episode resulted in an emergency room visit, an overnight stay in the hospital, and a new regimen of medications. She also has a follow-up appointment scheduled with her doctor for the upcoming week. Her breakdown didn't just affect her, it drew her entire family into the mess. This led to a whirlwind of long, exhausting conversations with everyone involved, her parents, her sister, and more. When we finally returned home, her family was still with us. I asked her what she wanted to do since our house was now crowded with her family. She said she needed some time alone with her mom. That was perfectly fine with me. Honestly, I had no desire to spend the entire day hanging around with her dad or sister. So I told her I would use the time to finish up some tasks at work and would come home later in the afternoon. 2 hours after I left for work, I received a text from her, begging me to come home immediately. She said she really needed to talk with me and that it was urgent. I wrapped up my work as quickly as I could and headed back home. When I arrived, I was met on my own front porch by her dad. He asked if he could speak with me for a moment. My frustration was already simmering beneath the surface, and I was mentally preparing for a potential showdown. I braced myself for the possibility that he might have come to dump a pile of lies on me, especially since we weren't exactly close. We had always been on decent terms, but I wasn't thrilled at the prospect of being the villain in this situation. We sat down on the deck chairs outside, and his opening statement completely floored me. I was expecting anything but what he said. He told me that she had explained the entire situation to her parents, and he felt it was important to apologize to me. He admitted that he felt he had failed as a parent and took responsibility for his daughter's mindset. He explained that her perspective on relationships and infidelity was heavily influenced by her mother. He told me that while he loved both his daughters deeply, he had long believed that the belief instilled in them, that anything that happened before marriage didn't count, was a terrible idea. He had argued with his wife years ago about the negative impact of this value system, and he felt it had shaped their daughter's views in a way that was now causing problems. He then clarified that he wasn't there to defend his daughter's actions, but he wanted me to understand that her behavior and the way she was handling things stemmed from her belief that marriage represented an entirely different reality. According to him, her parents had romanticized the concept of marriage to such an extent that she hadn't fully grasped the complexities and realities of real life. Essentially, he was placing some of the blame on his wife for shaping their daughter's unrealistic expectations. It wasn't what I had anticipated at all, and it felt like he was somewhat throwing his wife under the bus. Despite the unexpected nature of his remarks, it was clear he was trying to provide some context for his daughter's actions. We shook hands before he left, and he told me that no matter what decision I made, he held me in high regard. For a brief moment, his words offered me a sense of relief and made me feel appreciated, which was a small comfort amidst the chaos. I went inside to find my wife curled up on the couch, resting on her mom's lap. It was evident she had been crying the entire time I had been gone. Her mom got up, came over to me, and wrapped me in a hug. She apologized for everything that had happened, expressed her love for me, and said she was praying for us to find a way to work things out. Seeing my wife lying there on the couch, looking utterly dejected, was heart-wrenching. After her parents left, she remained on the couch, tears streaming down her face as she looked at me. Here's where I'm probably going to upset a lot of people, but I have to be honest, I couldn't handle seeing her like that. I went to her, and we embraced tightly, with her repeatedly apologizing for everything that had happened. I recognize that it was a weak moment on my part, but I have to defend myself by saying that, right before this whole ordeal, I loved her deeply and would have done anything to prevent her from being in pain. Even with everything that had happened, I still couldn't bear to see her suffering. Sure, it's entirely possible that she was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance, but in that moment, she truly seemed devastated. Once she had calmed down a bit, I asked her what she wanted to discuss. She said she wanted to lay everything out in the open so I wouldn't feel like I was being deceived or manipulated. She wanted me to ask her any questions I had, and I wished I had prepared a list, but I came up with a few questions off the top of my head. She was brutally honest in her responses, and some of the answers were tough to hear. I probably should have been more selective about the questions I asked, but the mental images are now etched in my mind, and they might have been there regardless. At least now, I had confirmation. First, I asked her for specific dates or at least approximate timelines. I didn't bring up my concern about when we got engaged because I didn't want her to alter her story. She recalled the dates with precision. Thankfully, this affair occurred earlier in our relationship than she initially indicated, so it was before we got engaged. That was a significant relief because I had felt physically ill when I worried about this being during our engagement. Second, I asked her how many times it happened. She went into detail, more than I had anticipated. Instead of just giving me a number of instances, she detailed the number of times there was penetration, believing that was what I needed to know. This level of detail didn't help, it was overwhelming and almost broke me down. The truth was that it wasn't as frequent as I feared. In fact, it occurred on only 3 separate days, though there were multiple instances on those days. Then came the hardest part, confronting the reason behind her actions. To be honest, I'm not exactly the epitome of manliness, and I'm ashamed to admit that I couldn't hold back my tears during this conversation. I asked her why I wasn't enough for her, why it had to be him, and why she didn't just leave me if she was unhappy. The floodgates opened, and all the pain came crashing down on me. It was overwhelming to think about her betrayal, having to watch them laughing together, and then hearing about the details of their encounters, the frequency, the places, all of it. As she tried to explain, I was so emotionally wrecked that I couldn't even process what she was saying. I was beyond distraught, and at that moment, nothing she said could make any difference or provide solace. After I finally managed to regain some semblance of composure, I told her that the betrayal itself was devastating, but her response to my discovery was just as hurtful, if not worse. Her initial attempt to brush off the gravity of the situation was a blow I wasn't prepared for. She agreed with my assessment and apologized for her earlier comments about my maturity. She admitted that she genuinely thought that now that we were married, the past wouldn't matter. Hearing her say this reignited my anger, and I could barely contain my frustration. I started to say something in response, but she quickly cut me off. After discussing things with her parents, she had come to realize the gravity of her actions. She confessed that cheating is, indeed, cheating, but she hoped that the happiness we've shared since our marriage should somehow make up for it. I told her that this happiness felt tainted, built on a foundation of deceit. Her response led to another emotional breakdown, almost pushing us back to the ER. With the help of Ativan and some deep breathing exercises into a paper bag, we managed to calm her down. I let her rest for the night, feeling emotionally drained myself. By Sunday, we attempted to talk again, but my patience and sympathy had all but vanished. I told her that introducing him to me was a terrible move, making me watch them dance together was even worse, and the fact that she only admitted to it because she feared getting caught was a level of deceit I hadn't anticipated. I demanded to know why she thought I would find out and how many people at the wedding were aware of their past. She admitted that he knew, and his best friend, who is now my brother-in-law, was also aware. This, in turn, led to her sister learning about it, and she was worried that her sister might be the one to reveal it to me. I asked her how frequently she had seen this guy, and she said that the wedding was the first time in 3 years. This revelation did little to comfort me. In a moment of intense frustration, I lost my temper and asked if she had been with him in the lead-up to the wedding. Her defensive reaction, acting like the very idea was preposterous because she was married now, only fueled my anger further. I felt as though she was living on Married Planet, where the roles were different, and her disconnection from reality was maddening. I had to leave the house to cool off because I couldn't handle the thought that she was so out of touch with the impact of her actions. When I finally came back and attempted to engage with her civilly, she asked me what she could do to help me move past this. It might seem like a small gesture, but it was the first time she genuinely offered to help me in a meaningful way. I told her I wasn't sure if there was anything she could do or if either of us could do anything to mend this situation. I might never be able to move past it. She expressed a strong desire to help because she couldn't bear seeing me in pain. She hoped that, over time, I'd be able to judge her based on who she is now. She was willing to do whatever it took to work things out and wanted to reassure me that she had been completely faithful since we got married and would never break her vows again. My response was a sarcastic thank you, which I admit wasn't the most mature reaction, but it felt like the only thing I could manage at that moment. I requested a break from further discussions until at least Wednesday. I had 2 important projects to complete, and I was emotionally exhausted. I was struggling to figure out what I wanted to do. My emotions swung wildly between fiery anger, where I wanted to kick her out of my life, and deep emotional turmoil, where I wanted to forget everything and try to move forward with her. As you know, I requested that we put our issues on hold until last night so I could focus on a crucial work-related project. She agreed to this, but I could clearly see that she was deeply emotional and visibly nervous. Despite the fact that she's been prescribed some strong benzodiazepines to manage her anxiety, the medication didn't seem to fully calm her. Her anxiety was palpable, and it was clear that she was struggling internally. I didn't want to come off as deliberately punishing her. My intention was actually to give us both a bit of space to regroup. Yet, she told me that my lack of physical affection and emotional support during this period felt almost like a form of emotional torture for her. When the evening finally arrived, we had what my dad would have called a come-to-Jesus meeting, a term he used for those serious, no-nonsense discussions that cut straight to the heart of the matter. I made it a point to bring home dinner to eliminate any distractions related to meal preparation or cleanup. The idea was to create a calm environment where we could focus entirely on our conversation. We began talking around 6 p.m., and the discussion stretched into the early hours of the morning, finally ending around 2 a.m. In those 8 hours, we dug into a lot of issues that had been bubbling under the surface. We discussed the events leading up to this point, how we got here, and what, if anything, we could do to move forward. We laid bare the cracks in our relationship and tried to determine if, and how, we could mend them. Ultimately, I decided to move in with my brother for an indefinite period starting today. This decision was understandably very upsetting to her. I'm making a conscious effort to maintain open communication, ensuring that she doesn't feel completely abandoned or neglected. I want her to know that while we're apart, I'm still here, willing to listen and support her as best I can. You might be wondering how our discussion led to this decision. Let me explain. I know this might not be what everyone wants to hear, but this is where I stand right now. My primary goal is to salvage our marriage, but I can't continue living under what feels like a distorted version of reality. I realize she never intended to deceive me once we were married. But when I reflect on whether I would have stayed with her had I known about the affair back then, the answer is always no. It feels like she robbed me of my ability to make an informed decision about our future. We spent the past few years building our life together on a foundation that wasn't entirely truthful. Despite that, we did manage to build something meaningful together. Sometimes, you can repair a foundation with a lot of hard work and dedication. Other times, you have to tear it down and start over. This is my hope now, to shake things up enough for both of us so that we can have a fresh start and rebuild our relationship on a more honest and transparent basis. As I mentioned in my initial post, our marriage up until now had been what I considered to be ideal, or as close to perfect as any relationship could be. However, the affair has introduced some deeply troubling dynamics into our relationship. Here's a more detailed overview of our conversation. I made it clear that while I am profoundly hurt by the cheating, and I firmly maintain that it is cheating, which she now accepts, I am equally disturbed by her blatant disregard for my feelings. I told her that being labeled as immature or childish for reacting to the betrayal was hurtful and dismissive. I have every right to be upset, and her attempt to downplay my feelings was unacceptable. In response, she apologized and admitted that she was wrong. She acknowledged that, at the time, she had convinced herself that, because we were married, my emotional response to her past actions was unwarranted. She now recognizes how flawed that reasoning was. I also expressed how disrespected I felt when she chose to interact with the man she had the affair with right in front of me. Having to shake his hand during the wedding was humiliating and made me feel like she was rubbing salt in the wound. Her explanation and apology did little to mitigate the damage done. Her behavior during and after the wedding made me feel like my emotions were disregarded, and that only added to the sense of betrayal. The whole experience left me feeling devalued and disrespected, and that's something we need to address moving forward. I then confronted her about her apparent lack of genuine remorse for having been with someone else while we were together. I expressed that, from my perspective, it seemed as though she wasn't truly sorry for the betrayal itself but rather regretted that I hadn't just accepted it and moved on without any repercussions. This was, for me, one of the most painful realizations, that her apology felt hollow because it seemed more focused on her discomfort with my reaction than on the betrayal she had committed. To her credit, she was brutally honest during this part of the discussion. At least I didn't have to navigate through a maze of evasions or half-truths. She admitted that when we returned home after the event and I first confronted her, she was initially in denial about the seriousness of my feelings. Her first instinct was to be angry at me for being upset, which she now sees as an irrational reaction on her part. This was largely influenced by the misguided belief, instilled by her upbringing, that marriage should automatically erase any past wrongs and that forgiveness should come easily, no matter how deep the hurt. She further confessed that her panic attack was not just about the immediate fear of losing me but also about the possibility of becoming the first person in her family to face divorce. This was a major trigger for her anxiety. As she's had more discussions with her family over the past week, she's begun to realize that the idealistic notions she had about marriage were misplaced. Her family's strong, intact marriages had led her to view marriage as a permanent, unbreakable bond, and facing the prospect of divorce felt like a personal failure. While she does feel remorse for the way she handled the situation, it was evident to me that she hadn't yet fully grasped the depth of her betrayal. She apologized for introducing the guy to me and acknowledged that it was thoughtless, but she never expressed direct guilt about the affair itself, which remained a troubling gap in her apology. I want to clarify that the account I've given so far is a summarized version of what transpired. During our lengthy discussion, she wasn't cold or robotic. There were genuine tears, real, heartfelt ones, not the dramatic, "oh woe is me" kind I'd seen before. There were moments filled with raw emotion, some curse words, and even instances of pleading and begging. The conversation stretched over 8 hours, and by the end, she was visibly exhausted, both physically and emotionally. After our intense discussion, I laid out the conditions for any potential reconciliation. Ultimately, it's up to her whether she wants to continue our marriage. Despite the complexity of our situation, she is adamant about working things out, and here are the steps I've established for us moving forward. No contact with the other person, regardless of how illogical or harsh it might seem. She must completely sever any and all contact with him. This is a non-negotiable deal breaker for me. I was absolutely clear about this stipulation. Couples therapy. We need to commit to couples therapy to address the underlying issues and work through our problems with professional guidance. Maintain fidelity. While I'm living with my brother, we are still legally married. This situation does not give either of us a free pass to see other people. This is another deal breaker. I am committed to this, and I trust that she is as well. Starting over. We need to start over, to a degree. This doesn't mean erasing the past, but rather acknowledging that the foundation of our relationship has shifted. I will need time to adjust how I view her, and though it's painful, I can't just forget that she chose to cheat. So that's where we stand now. I realize that this might not be the resolution some were hoping for, but ultimately, I have to choose a path that I believe will lead to my long-term happiness. My mind tells me to remain cautious and protect my heart, but my heart still holds love for her. We have planned a date for Friday night, which she is looking forward to with a lot of hope and anticipation. I'm uncertain how long I'll stay with my brother, maybe just until Friday, or perhaps longer. The important thing is that I feel like I've regained some control over my situation, which I felt I had lost prior to our discussion. In the end, despite everything, I held her for a long time, and we spent the night together. I don't want her to be broken. I want her to be my life partner, but it's crucial for her to understand that being a true partner means caring about my feelings with the same depth and sincerity as I do about hers. I've been staying with my brother for just over a month now, and I can't express enough how grateful I am to him. His support has been unwavering, and his kindness during this difficult time has shown me a new side of him. Growing up, we were close in the sense that we had each other's backs, but we were never particularly close emotionally. This experience has deepened our bond in a way I hadn't anticipated, and it's been a revelation to see how strong our relationship really is. The significant development is that I've served her with divorce papers. Now, before those who were rooting for me to end things start celebrating, let me explain the context behind this decision. I visited a divorce lawyer to discuss our situation. I was clear with him that, although I didn't want to proceed with a divorce, I wanted to have everything in place as a precaution. He prepared a divorce decree and made 3 copies, one for him, one for me, and one for her. My intention was never to use the paperwork unless absolutely necessary, but to have it ready if things didn't go as planned. I decided to deliver the paperwork to her personally. I wanted to explain my actions and clarify my intentions before she saw the documents. I handed her the manila envelope and explained what it contained. I made it very clear that I wasn't planning to file for divorce unless we both failed to adhere to the conditions we had agreed upon. I wanted her to understand that my commitment to working things out was genuine, and the paperwork was just a backup to show that I was serious about the agreement. Unfortunately, my timing couldn't have been worse. Despite her efforts to meet the conditions of our agreement and the positive strides we had been making, such as enjoyable dates and meaningful conversations, presenting the divorce papers seemed to overshadow those efforts. It made it appear as though I was not acknowledging the progress she had made. This misstep led to another severe anxiety attack for her, which couldn't be managed with her medication. We ended up back in the ER where she received a shot and was sent home. We agreed to keep her family out of it this time, and I stayed with her for 2 days to ensure she was okay. This incident came up during our counseling sessions, and I realized that my actions had inadvertently made me appear manipulative and insensitive. Reflecting on it, I understood that I had misjudged the situation. The look of despair on her face when she received the divorce papers was something I never want to witness again. She had been so relieved and happy to see me that day, only to be confronted with a symbol of our fractured relationship, which instantly filled her with sadness and fear. Given the progress we've made since then and the realization of the emotional toll my actions had taken on her, I've decided to move back home this weekend. My brother has been incredibly accommodating, but I'm aware that my presence has imposed on his space and routine, despite his reassurances. As much as I've enjoyed spending time playing Xbox and catching up, it's clear that it's time for me to return to my own life. The decision to go home is also rooted in the fact that she has complied with all of my requests, and I recognize that she has already endured significant emotional hardship. I believe she has learned from her mistakes and understands the gravity of our situation. Despite the mistakes she made years ago, she has been a largely supportive and loving partner up until the revelation of her infidelity. I understand that my choice might disappoint some of you and might lead to criticism or messages questioning my decisions. However, this is my life and my marriage, and only I can navigate the complexities of my relationship. So, as of now, this is where we stand. We are not miraculously healed, nor have we fully resolved all of our issues, but we are making progress. It will require time, patience, and understanding from both of us. I'm hopeful that we can continue on this path of healing and eventually rebuild our relationship into something stronger and more resilient. This will likely be my final update on this matter unless there are significant developments. For now, I'm focusing on moving forward and working on our relationship, step by step.